Well, look, before we get to press freedom, which has been a big issue over the last week, the latest twist on the tax cut debate, I just want to start there. Kerry-Anne Pauline Hanson today says at this stage she's not supporting the third stage of the tax cuts.
Sure.
What does at this stage mean?
Oh, well, it means, let's just look at the history of this, shall we? Let's look at her no, I won't, yes, I will, over the personal tax cuts at this time last year, and then the business tax cuts. No, I won't. Yes, I will. No, I won't. So at this stage probably means...
Show me what you got.
Gimme, show me the colour of your money.
Well, she's nominated...
Give me what I want.
She's nominated, Fiona, the Bradfield scheme and coal-fired power stations. Do you think the government will give her either?
Well, I think the government will review both. And, I mean, Barnaby Joyce has also made a lot of remarks. And I think one remark I'd have to say of Barnaby's that I agree with is that the best time to build dams and aquifers and think about things like a Bradfield scheme is in the middle of the drought. And that's the... that's the situation we have right now. So I think on the East Coast particularly, I think that's a pretty good conversation to have, whether it is exactly the Bradfield scheme. So I think in some ways that conversation about Pauline Hanson is good. But look, I mean, today, David, I saw your tweet of sharing out the Reuters story about 2025 and half of all Toyotas being electric vehicles. I want to know how we're going to have a national grid that's going to support that amount of electric vehicles on the road, how we're actually going to build that sort of electric generation, that sort of power generation, and how the grid and the transmission lines are going to reach all those different, pumping stations everywhere.
It's another reason why we need a lot more generation in our electricity market, right?
Yeah.
That's one
but
thing.
does that
Bradfield
mean...
scheme, Kerry-Anne,
Sorry, David, but does that mean a coal-fired power station is the answer? And I'm not sure it actually is. I think we need to have a logical debate here, not some negotiating on the Senate about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this it's something that's been on the table and been debated for a while. Why not continue it, But the Bradfield scheme...
Yeah, we should explain what this is.
Well, basically diverting water inland.
It's been around for...
80 years. 80 years since the 1930s. On monetary, scientific and environmental grounds over many, many reports by many, many experts across those three disciplines, it has been knocked back. It has been rejected as unsound on those three very important criteria. I do not know why it continues to be raised in a serious way.
I think every time there's a drought.
Every time there's a drought, but when you have something that's been so comprehensively dissed, surely they can come up with something that has a bit more credibility than something that has done the loop of the mountain many times.
As far as the tax cuts are concerned, I don't think Pauline Hanson's comments today mean that she's completely out of the cart here, right? I mean, don't forget last year, as you point out, Kerry-Anne, she was making very similar concerns and comments about the then tax cut.
Yes, that's right.
And at the end of the day, they don't even have to have one nation to get this through. If they can get the two Centre Alliance votes, Jackie Lambie and Corey Bernardi,
just four of
they
six.
would get.
Four of six, basically.
They can get it through.
But Pauline has form in this area of not sticking the course. So let's just see where she lands. But I also think that it seems prudent to me not to go talking about the third stage in some years hence when the economy is looking pretty shaky as it is.
Well, just on that, Fiona, I mean, do you think there's a... I know they've won an election, so they can play the mandate card here, but is there a strong argument that we should legislate now, 50 billion plus worth of tax cuts that don't kick in for 5 years?
Look, you've got to have a system, and you've got to have a tax system that allows the market and the economy to plan ahead. This was one of the reasons why...
Have we ever done this before? Legislated tax cuts 5 years in advance?
Well, you can't just you can't bring it overnight, David. You've got to actually phase it in, and I think a 5-year system is probably a good thing to do.
Can't bring it overnight.
Governments have operated like this for years, Fiona. They certainly haven't operated by bringing in, trying to second-guess what's going to happen 5 years hence.
Yeah, what's changed that we need to legislate that far out? Fiona?
Sorry, I thought you were asking Kerry-Anne there.
Yeah. No, I'm asking you. What's changed that we now need to legislate 5 years into the future?
Look, David, we are one of the more taxed economies in the OECD, and if you look at our company tax rates, it is one of the highest in the OECD as the rest of the world have slowly brought their tax rates down. They haven't done that overnight. If you look at because of where bracket creep is, if you look at where our income tax is, you've got the same sort of issues happening. You can't just drop taxes overnight because that won't necessarily, that will have a bit of a jolting effect on the economy. You need to actually bring these in a slower phased way, which is what we've seen many of the developed economies around the world do. And at the moment, Australia is being left behind and therefore not competitive against many other international economies.
It sounds good, but it's not.
Well, yeah,
it's bunkum.
You get 5 years of political capital out of that.
Yeah, well, no, you're trying to lock in a political attitude to. You're trying to lock voters in, basically. It's almost like putting them on. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, but look, in 5 years' time, how on earth do you know what the state of the economy is going to be like? I just think it's too big a gamble, and I think that, you know, Labor is right in questioning it, that Centre Alliance is right in questioning it, and Pauline, if she stays the course, is right in questioning it.
Yeah, look, I guess, you know, if things really did hit the skids with the economy and the budget, you could undo it down the track, but that raised the question, why would you do it in the first place?
Well, exactly. It just makes you look... It's all a bit messy.
Now, let's turn to the arguments around press freedom, Kerry-Anne, as... you know, a journalist who's seen police raids.
Yes.
First time this has happened. What did you make of last week's raids? I guess the question is, were they justified given the sort of classified, you know, security breaches that took place in the stories that were reported?
But the stories were in the public interest.
Were they in the public interest?
Yeah.
Were the raids therefore proportionate with the sort of risk they were trying to address?
Really, 7.5 hours at Annika Smethurst's home. What about raiding her office? Aren't they most likely to find what they're looking for there? But
what do you reckon that was? I mean, what?
Oh, because I think there's more likely to be material in her office that would implicate politicians, if indeed politicians were involved. I mean, why are politicians quarantined from scrutiny over leaks? Why are there investigations into leaks that have, you know, that embarrass the government rather than those that haven't embarrassed?
Well, that's I'll come to that with Fiona.
And that are
just on the point you make about
opportunistic.
why her office wasn't raided and instead her home was raided, and you can see the personal invasion of privacy.
Absolutely.
A lot greater when it's at home.
Yep.
You know, you and I have worked in Parliament House for many years. I can't recall, has there ever been a journalist office raided in Parliament House, or is it too difficult given it is in Parliament House?
Well, I was in the gallery from 1984 to 2009, and unless it happened discreetly up the other end of the corridor, I didn't ever see such
Maybe the message for journalists there is do all your dealings in your Parliament House office.
In your Parliament House office, where everybody can see them coming and going, yes, great idea,
and
David.
to get into the building is a little more difficult.
No, because
from the Speaker and the President of the Senate and...
Yeah, where there's a will, there's a way, and I believe I believe there is a lot to answer here, and that there is a lot at stake.
Yeah.
And it's all very well for Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, to say that he's happy for the law to be upheld, and he's never unhappy when the laws... Well, these laws are wrong, and I think Labor also has...
The point Kerry-Anne makes, and the point many have made, Fiona, that I'm not sure has been adequately described or answered yet, is why these raids, you know, over these leaks that were embarrassing for the government, but no raids, and in fact the investigation dropped altogether over a leak that was quite helpful to the government. That was over the ASIO information on the Medivac laws. Do you think that's been explained?
No, I don't think it has, David, and I think I agree with everything that you and Kerry-Anne just said. I mean, look, I understand Scott Morrison's view that he's got to, you know, they uphold the law and all of those things, but 7.5 hours and going through her underwear drawer, I don't understand that, and why not her actual office? I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about this. I think when it comes to the freedom of the press, this is one of the most important virtues of a free and open society. When we look at, you know, all of the lies and the mistruths that get out there on social media, if we don't have the protection of our press, how do we have the ability of actually being able to have Australians informed? If we have journalists that feel threatened by these sorts of behaviours, how are they going to be fearless to go out and search the truth, even if it's uncomfortable for a government? I think there's a lot of questions here. I think there's a lot of questions that the lawyers, no doubt, for News Corp and the ABC are going to get to the bottom of, and let's hope they actually do.
Yeah, there was an interesting comment, in fact, from Matthias Cormann today in his press conference. He was asked about it. He said, look, there's going to be... He indicated there'd be more to be announced later in the week by the government on this. What do you think the next thing to follow will be, Kerry-Anne? Are we looking at an inquiry into press freedoms? Do you think the government would be interested in doing anything like that?
I don't think there needs to be an inquiry into press freedoms. I think there needs to be an inquiry into what we actually have as law now and how that impacts on press freedom.
That's what I mean. Looking at the... News Corp's put up, I think, about 10 pieces of legislation that need
and the
addressing.
ABC is considering legal recourse here. There definitely has to be something. This should be something that the Parliament unites around. When we're getting international condemnation over this, and we're talking, and there are headlines internationally about our secretive democracy, it's time for us to take stock. And Labor has to also look at itself. Why did it continue in the last term to just, tick off anything that was put before it in any space that that was deemed in the so-called in the national interest, for fear of being wedged politically? I mean, this is not what.
You think Labor's been a bit opportunistic this week?
I think that they failed. Certainly Richard Marles yesterday on Insiders failed to explain precisely why the Labor opposition has been so quick to succumb to what the government wants in this area. And I find it quite frightening that we have had increasing powers given to our intelligence agencies without justification.
Look, with any of these,
impinge on freedom.
With any of these things, Fiona, there needs to be the balance. You've got to protect classified information. I think most people accept that. There's a need, a heightened need around national security in recent years and so on. But it's not until the last week that we've really seen the arguments mounted for press freedom to be protected as well. It's important to our democracy. Where does this need to land? Do you think there needs to be... I mean, I know Rex Patrick's even suggesting a constitutional change along the lines of the First Amendment in the United States that enshrines constitutional protection. And look, who knows? This ABC legal action could ultimately lead to a High Court test of what implied rights there are for freedom of communication. Do you think there's a need for either constitutional or, at the very least, legal change?
Look, David, I think there needs to be a look, and we don't necessarily have a Bill of Rights like the Americans do that would fit necessarily in that space. But I do think there is a wider look, and if you look at the conservative side of politics for a long period of time, where you look at 18C and the Racial Discrimination Act and some of the aspects there that could be slightly amended, like offend and insult, and should other pieces be put in instead. There's also a lot of talk about freedom of speech and what freedoms are allowed. And every time somebody like a Milo Yiannopoulos pops his head up, bang, it's there again. I think there is some challenges here in regard to freedom of speech, freedom of the press, what people can say, what people can't say, and what that all means. Because at the end of the day, I don't think we've got a happy solution here. Does that mean that we need to look at some sort of additional document like a Bill of Rights that starts to enshrine some of these core virtues? But of course, when you do look at that, and I think in some ways we do miss that overarching document, you then create a whole raft of other challenges, like in, say, America, where the right to bear arms has then held them back in many ways of being able to deal with that issue as well. I think this is a really important debate, and I think it's really important to see where the lawyers land, particularly, like the point I made before, particularly the national broadcasters, so the ABC lawyers, but then, of course, the other end of the spectrum with News Corp to then talk about these things. And it's not just about the freedom of the press, it's the freedom to be able to say the things they need to say. You go back to, say, some of the challenges that Andrew Bolt has had. This is a wider discussion that we know in Australia, whether you be in the political class or the media class, that these issues are not working, and every time we have another national security scare and there's another layer of legislation wrapped on top that might be there to sort of attack, you know, something in social media, we're actually giving up so many freedoms. That is that really worth it? And are we now have an issue where we really do need to start from scratch and draft a proper set of freedom of speech, freedom of the press laws?
Well, and hopefully strengthened whistleblower protection. I mean,
along the way, and
you know, an ATO bloke facing a maximum of 160 years in jail for something that, you know, just a little excessive.
Yeah.